The emergency lights had stopped flashing hours ago. There was no energy left to waste on warnings that everyone already understood. A dull crimson glow from backup cells spread across the command deck of the exploration vessel, Valoran painting exhausted faces with the color of dried blood. Every breath carried the stale taste of recycled air that had been filtered far beyond its intended lifespan. Captain Kalen remained at the center of the bridge without moving. His four-fingered hands rested on the scarred command console while he watched another section of the life source support display fade from yellow into dark gray. "Atmosphere reserves?" he asked quietly. The answer came from First Officer Cyreth without even looking up. 14 hours for the bridge, less 11 for engineering, less than 8 in the medical bay. Nobody reacted. The numbers had become meaningless after the first week. The Valoran had never been built for war. It carried scientists, diplomats, engineers, children of ambassadors, and enough supplies for peaceful exploration beyond Imperial territory. They had believed the Galactic Empire's official navigation routes were safe. Instead, they had wandered into disputed space, where an Imperial patrol declared them spies before firing a single warning shot. The attack itself had lasted only minutes. Their escort frigates burned. Their engines were shattered. Their communications array survived just long enough to send thousands of distress signals before collapsing into silence. Then the Empire left. Not because they showed mercy, because they believed starvation was cheaper than ammunition. Kalen remembered watching the enemy fleet disappear into slipspace, while hundreds of terrified civilians screamed through every compartment of the ship. He had spent nearly 30 years protecting lives, and in one afternoon he had become the captain of a floating grave. Medical Chief Lyra stepped onto the bridge carrying a data slate with hands that trembled from exhaustion. Her uniform had dark stains where blood had dried after emergency surgery. "We lost another 6. Kalen closed his eyes. "Civilians?" she nodded. The youngest was 12. No one spoke again. Silence had become part of the crew. The medical bay had transformed into a place where hope was measured in oxygen canisters rather than medicine. Human concepts like comfort no longer existed there. Patients shared blankets designed for one person. Nurses skipped meals they no longer had. Every corridor echoed with restrained coughing because the filtration system could no longer remove microscopic debris from the damaged ventilation lines. Lyra had not slept in almost 3 days. Neither had anyone else. Every hour another patient quietly stopped breathing. Every hour another blanket covered another face. Still, the distress beacon continued broadcasting. Not because anyone believed rescue would come, because shutting it off felt like surrender. Deep beneath the bridge, Engineer Tarek climbed through a maintenance shaft carrying replacement wiring scavenged from the ship's entertainment systems. The cinema room, recreational halls, and private cabins had all been dismantled to keep life support operating a little longer. His assistant looked toward him. "Does it matter anymore?" Tarek continued connecting wires. "It matters until the lights go out. But no one's coming, maybe. They've ignored 73 distress calls." Tarek tightened the final connector. "Then we'll send 74. Across the galaxy, the distress transmission reached government after government. Some refused to answer. Others acknowledged receipt before filing the message under military risk assessments. Several politicians argued that entering Imperial territory would provoke unnecessary conflict. A senator from one prosperous alliance summarized the mood during a closed council session. "They're already dead. Why sacrifice more lives?" No rescue fleets launched. No humanitarian corridors opened. The beacon drifted across civilized space like the cry of someone drowning while entire cities listened from warm, comfortable homes. Days became weeks. The oxygen dropped lower. Captain Kalen stopped making speeches because he no longer believed his own words. He simply walked the corridors every day. He sat beside frightened children. He carried water to elderly passengers. He listened more than he spoke. One evening he found a young mechanic named Vesha staring through a cracked observation window toward endless darkness. "My parents told me space was beautiful." Kalen stood beside her. "It is. It doesn't look beautiful. No, it looks empty." Kalen searched for an answer that didn't exist. "It only looks empty because we're still here to see it." Thousands of light years away, beyond territories that most galactic civilizations dismissed as dangerous and unstable, an isolated listening station floated above a blue world surrounded by orbital shipyards. The station had no elegant architecture. Its armor plates were mismatched. Repair welds crossed every corridor. Coffee stains decorated half the control consoles. The rotating radar dishes looked decades older than the station itself. It belonged to Earth. Corporal Noah Briggs leaned back in his chair while rubbing tired eyes. Night shifts rarely produced anything except navigation noise and ancient satellite echoes. His coffee had gone cold hours earlier. Then a sharp tone interrupted the silence. One transmission. Weak, fragmented, artificial. his monitor filled with corrupted symbols before the translation software slowly reconstructed fragments of the message. Civilian vessel. Life support critical, please. Anion, children aboard. Briggs stopped breathing. He replayed the transmission. Again. Every replay sounded weaker. Every replay carried voices beneath the static. Real voices, not automated distress code. People. He immediately contacted the duty officer. Within minutes, the quiet station transformed into organized chaos. Communication specialists isolated the source. Signal analysts confirmed its age. Navigation officers calculated the impossible distance. Someone finally spoke the conclusion everyone feared. It's inside Imperial influence. The operations room fell silent. Major Evelyn Ross entered carrying a folder before hearing the final sentence. She looked around. No one says anything. An officer slowly answered. If we answer, we're crossing into territory controlled by the largest military in known space. Ross folded her arms. How many civilians? No exact number. Estimate. Several thousand. She looked at the frozen distress recording. Forward everything to Earth Command. The transmission reached Earth less than 6 minutes later. Within an hour, military headquarters, civilian governments, rescue organizations, and international leaders gathered inside the Unified Security Council beneath Geneva. The room carried decades of history. Nations that once fought devastating wars now argued around the same circular table. Some wore military uniforms, others expensive suits. One chair belonged to Commander Marcus Hale. Unlike the politicians, he remained silent while the recording played. The frightened voices echoed through the chamber. When it ended, nobody immediately spoke. Finally, a diplomat broke the silence. The Empire considers this restricted territory. Another answered. Our navy isn't large enough to challenge them. A finance minister leaned forward. We don't even know these people. Marcus finally raised his eyes. They know fear. Several heads turned. The minister frowned. Commander, this isn't emotional. No. Marcus's voice remained calm. It's moral. Another official placed a data tablet onto the table. Our analysts estimate over 90% this becomes a military confrontation. Marcus studied the casualty projections. Then he gently pushed them aside. If someone called for help from the middle of the ocean, would we ask whether the storm belongs to another country before launching rescue boats? No one answered. The silence grew uncomfortable. President Sofia Alvarez stood near the panoramic window overlooking orbital construction yards where enormous vessels surrounded Earth like mountains floating against the stars. Our species spent thousands of years waiting for someone stronger to save us. She looked toward every representative. No one came. Another long silence followed. Then an elderly rescue coordinator quietly spoke. I've spent 40 years responding to earthquakes, floods, and wars. He looked around the room. I've learned something. Everyone listened. The moment we decide strangers are not worth saving, we stop being who we are. One vote followed another, slowly, reluctantly, then unanimously. Authorization granted. Operation Lifeline commenced immediately. Across Earth, alarms echoed through orbital shipyards. Massive construction docks awakened from standby. Industrial cranes lifted armored hull sections larger than skyscrapers. Supply crews sprinted across steel platforms carrying medical equipment instead of missiles. Cargo bays filled with food, portable hospitals, oxygen generators, water purification systems, and emergency shelters. Doctors volunteered before receiving orders. Nurses packed surgical kits. Mechanics canceled leave. Entire civilian rescue organizations stood beside naval personnel. No one asked about payment. No one asked whether the passengers were allies. They only asked one question. When do we leave? Commander Marcus Hale walked through the flagship, Resolute, whose armored hull bore scars from countless rescue operations and defensive patrols. The vessel lacked elegant curves or decorative lights. It looked like something built to survive punishment rather than impress observers. Weld marks covered its thick exterior, and massive engines rumbled with restrained power beneath layers of reinforced plating. Medical Director Dr. Elena Vasquez met Marcus inside Hangar 3, where hundreds of volunteers loaded emergency supplies. You know we're probably sailing into a war. Marcus nodded. I know. She watched another group at secure portable intensive care units. And if they fire first? Marcus looked across the endless rows of medics preparing stretchers instead of rifles. Then they fire at people carrying medicine. Earth's orbital defenses opened one launch corridor after another. One ship departed. Then 5. Then 20. Heavy rescue cruisers, escort destroyers, hospital carriers, engineering vessels, fuel tenders, armored transports. The formation stretched across space until it resembled a moving continent built from steel. Families gathered beneath clear night skies around the world as brilliant engine trails climbed into orbit. Children pointed upward without understanding why their parents suddenly looked emotional. News networks interrupted every broadcast with images of humanity's largest rescue fleet ever assembled. No victory music played, no speeches promised glory. Only quiet determination echoed across every deck. On the bridge of the Resolute, Marcus accepted the final navigation report. Slipspace coordinates confirmed. Fleet synchronized. Medical division standing by. He rested one hand on the command rail. Open a channel to every ship. Thousands of faces appeared across hundreds of displays. Sailors, doctors, engineers, pilots, mechanics. Ordinary men and women wearing uniforms stained by grease and long hours. Marcus spoke softly enough that every person leaned closer. We don't know their language. We don't know their history. We don't know whether they'll remember our names. He paused. But somewhere out there, someone is waiting for help. The bridge fell completely silent. Marcus looked toward the stars. Take us to them. Across the formation, colossal slipspace engines awakened together. Blue-white energy wrapped around every human vessel as space itself began folding inward. Far beyond known borders, Captain Kalen sat beside a dying child whose breathing had grown painfully slow. The emergency beacon continued whispering into the endless darkness, unheard by every civilization that claimed to stand for peace. Then, without warning, one faint sensor buried deep inside the crippled Valoran detected something impossible, not one jump signature, hundreds. Kalen slowly lifted his head toward the tactical display. As the entire bridge stared at the growing wall of incoming contacts, their origin still hidden behind the violent storm of unfolding slipspace. Captain Kalen had seen fleets before. He had commanded alongside battle groups that stretched across entire sectors, escorted diplomats through contested systems, and witnessed imperial armadas blot out stars. None of those memories prepared him for what appeared beyond the fractured hull of the Valoran. The tactical display struggled to process the incoming contacts. Hundreds of slipspace signatures erupted simultaneously, not in the elegant geometric formations favored by the Galactic Empire, but in dense, practical clusters that suggested discipline forged through necessity rather than ceremony. One after another, enormous vessels emerged from the blue distortion. Their hulls were thick, angular, and scarred by years of repairs. Weld lines crossed armor plates like healed wounds. Massive engine blocks glowed with restrained power, and every ship looked less like a masterpiece of engineering than a fortress built by people who expected to survive impossible odds. Silence settled over the bridge. One sensor officer whispered, almost afraid of hearing his own voice. They're not Imperial." Another shook his head. No registry matches. Kalen remained motionless, studying the strange fleet. There was nothing graceful about these ships. They carried no polished ceremonial plating or decorative lighting. Every meter of steel seemed built with a single purpose: to endure. Yet what unsettled him most was their formation. They were not aiming weapons. They were surrounding the Valoran, not as predators, as a shield. Before anyone could react, the communications console crackled. Static filled the bridge, followed by a calm, unfamiliar voice speaking through an imperfect translator. "This is Human Rescue Fleet Alpha. We have received your distress signal." The translation paused for several seconds before continuing. "You are no longer alone." No one answered. Several crew members simply stared. Medical Chief Lyra covered her mouth as tears filled her exhausted eyes. Around her, officers who had remained composed through starvation and death suddenly began breaking down. Some lowered their heads onto their consoles. Others openly cried. Captain Kalen forced himself to respond. "This is Captain Kalen of the civilian exploration vessel Valoran. Life support has failed across multiple sections. Thousands require immediate medical assistance." The human voice replied without hesitation. "We understand." Another brief pause. "We brought hospitals." Kalen frowned. "Hospitals?" The reply came with quiet certainty. "Entire ships. Aboard the human flagship Resolute." Commander Marcus Hale stood on the bridge watching the crippled alien vessel rotate slowly against the darkness. Even from several kilometers away, the damage was horrifying. Hull sections had been torn open by kinetic impacts. Emergency bulkheads glowed where internal pressure barely held. Escape pods still clung to docking ports that had never been used because their occupants knew there was nowhere to escape. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered carrying casualty estimates. "They're worse than we predicted." Marcus accepted the report. "How many?" She swallowed. "If our scans are accurate, they've survived on emergency reserves for nearly 3 weeks. Marcus looked toward the enormous ship. "How many still alive?" "Approximately 4,000. And critical." Elena hesitated. "Almost all of them." Marcus closed the report. "Begin transfer operations." Within seconds, the fleet came alive. Heavy engineering ships extended massive docking arms instead of weapon batteries. Hospital carriers released hundreds of armored medical shuttles that crossed space in disciplined formations. Cargo transports opened their bays, revealing portable atmospheric generators, water purification units, emergency reactors, and food containers stacked floor to ceiling. Not a single missile launcher rotated toward the alien vessel. Only rescue craft. The first human shuttle locked against docking port 7, with a deep metallic impact that echoed through the dying corridors of the Valoran. Inside, frightened civilians gathered behind sealed emergency doors. No one knew what humans looked like. Rumors spread throughout the galaxy for generations described Deathworlders as monsters from a violent planet where predators ruled oceans, skies, and forests alike. Entire academies taught that humans possessed terrifying endurance, impossible aggression, and frightening adaptability. Children imagined giants covered in scars. Adults imagined soldiers. The airlock cycled. Steam rolled across the floor. Heavy boots stepped through. The first human wore dark gray rescue armor scarred by years of service. His helmet came off slowly, revealing tired blue eyes beneath streaks of grease. His beard carried flecks of gray despite his relatively young age. He looked around at dozens of terrified aliens. Nobody moved. Finally, the human smiled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heroic. It was simply reassuring. "My name's Sergeant Daniel Brooks." The translator hesitated before catching up. "We're here to take you home." An elderly alien collapsed into tears. Every corridor became a battlefield against death. Human medics worked without pause. They lifted patients too weak to stand. They carried children wrapped in thermal blankets. Portable oxygen units filled the stale air with fresh atmosphere. Engineers crawled into ruined machinery, welding broken conduits while sweat soaked their uniforms despite the freezing temperatures. No one asked which species deserved treatment first. The answer was always the same. "Who needs help?" Dr. Elena personally entered the overcrowded medical bay. The smell struck her immediately. Burned electronics, antiseptics nearly exhausted, recycled air, and illness. Alien doctors stood frozen, not because they feared humans, because they were too exhausted to continue. One physician nearly collapsed before Elena caught him. "Easy," the translator converted her words. "You've done enough," the alien blinked. "I still have patience." Elena gently guided him toward a chair. "So do I." She turned toward her own team. "Let's work." For the next 12 hours, no one rested. Human surgeons operated beside alien physicians despite barely understanding each other's language. They communicated through gestures, diagrams, and instinct. Every successful operation built another fragile bridge between two civilizations that had never imagined meeting under such circumstances. A young alien girl refused treatment until she learned whether her younger brother survived. A human nurse spent nearly 40 minutes searching the evacuation manifests. When she finally found him alive aboard another hospital ship, she returned kneeling beside the child's bed. "He's safe." The little girl threw her arms around someone she had met only minutes earlier. The nurse quietly cried while holding her. Captain Kalen eventually boarded the Resolute after refusing evacuation until every civilian had been transferred first. He expected a military flagship. Instead, he found organized exhaustion. The corridors were crowded with doctors pushing stretchers. Mechanics carried reactor components through passageways still smelling of machine oil. Galley workers handed out hot meals to strangers before serving themselves. Everywhere he looked, humans were working, not for recognition, simply because there was work to do. Marcus greeted him outside the bridge. For several moments, neither commander spoke. Finally, Kalen looked directly into the human's eyes. "You crossed Imperial territory." Marcus nodded. "Yes, you could have started a war." Another nod, possibly. Kalen struggled to understand. "You didn't even know us," Marcus answered quietly. "You asked for help, nothing more. No speech. No political explanation, just 4 words. Kalen lowered his head. Across 3 decades of military service, no sentence had ever carried more weight. Repairs continued throughout the fleet. The Valoran remained too damaged for independent travel. So, human engineering vessels reinforced her fractured hull with external support frames. Massive magnetic clamps secured entire sections together while portable reactors restored power compartment by compartment. Hope slowly returned. Children laughed for the first time in weeks. Alien cooks shared recipes with human galley crews despite the language barrier. Engineers compared tools, discovering that practical minds solved problems in surprisingly similar ways regardless of biology. One evening, Sergeant Brooks found Captain Kalen standing before a large observation window. The alien watched dozens of human workers crossing outside in armored suits while welding new armor plates directly onto the crippled vessel. "They haven't stopped." Brooks smiled. "They won't. They've worked 30 hours. They'll rotate eventually." "When?" Brooks looked outside. "When the job's finished." Kalen stared at the silhouettes moving across the hull. "Why?" Brooks thought for a moment. "Because someone once did the same for us. The peace lasted 19 hours. At precisely 0437 fleet time, warning sirens erupted across every human vessel. The bridge lights shifted instantly from white to deep crimson. A tactical officer stood. "Multiple slip space ruptures!" Another voice followed immediately. "Range, 8 million kilometers." The main display illuminated 1 contact, then 6, then 12. Finally, 27 enormous warships emerged from hyperspace, Imperial dreadnoughts, each one several times larger than the already massive Resolute. Dark hulls advanced in perfect formation, weapon systems powered up. Captain Kalen felt every remaining trace of hope disappear. They found us. Marcus never looked away from the display. Status: enemy weapons charging. Estimated firing solution in 6 minutes. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the numbers. The human fleet could not defeat 27 Imperial dreadnoughts in open combat, not without catastrophic losses. Marcus pressed the fleet-wide communications switch. All civilian vessels begin immediate withdrawal. No panic entered his voice. Hospital ships continue evacuation. The tactical officer looked toward him. Sir, they'll overtake us. Marcus nodded once. I know. Across space, the enormous human fleet began moving. Not backward, forward. Heavy destroyers accelerated into formation. Cruisers shifted position with practiced precision. Engineering vessels locked themselves together. Hospital carriers moved behind them. Then, one after another, every human warship placed its armored hull between the approaching Imperial Armada and the helpless alien survivors. On Captain Kalen's screen, the formation resembled an immense wall of steel stretching across the darkness, not attacking, standing, protecting. Every alarm aboard the Resolute screamed as enemy targeting systems locked onto human vessels. Marcus Hale remained perfectly still. His hands rested behind his back. His eyes never left the approaching fleet. They'll have to go through us first. And in the growing silence between two civilizations, 27 Imperial dreadnoughts advanced toward the line of humanity. The distance between the two fleets continued to shrink. Across the tactical display aboard the Resolute, 27 Imperial dreadnoughts advanced in flawless formation. Their black hulls reflected the pale light of distant stars, each vessel carrying enough firepower to erase cities from planetary surfaces. Targeting solutions spread across every monitor on the bridge as the enemy weapon arrays locked onto the human fleet. No one spoke, no one needed to. Every sailor understood what stood before them. Commander Marcus Hale rested both hands behind his back, his posture calm enough to make the silence feel heavier. Around him, officers carried out their duties with disciplined precision. Helm crews adjusted formation by fractions of a degree. Engineers diverted every reserve watt into defensive shielding. Damage control teams sealed blast doors, long before the first shot had been fired. This was not preparation for victory. It was preparation to endure. Inside the lead Imperial flagship Dominion's Wrath, Grand Admiral Varek studied the tactical projection with visible confusion. Confirm the sensor readings. His intelligence officer looked again. They're accurate, Admiral. The rescue vessels have not retreated. No. The hospital ships? They remain behind the warships. Varek narrowed his eyes. They understand they cannot win. Yes. And still they advance? Yes, Admiral. For nearly a minute, the command deck remained silent. Every officer aboard the Imperial flagship had spent decades studying military doctrine. Every civilization eventually surrendered when overwhelming force appeared. Some negotiated. Others fled. These humans had done neither. A secure transmission crossed the void. Marcus accepted it. The face that appeared on the bridge belonged to Grand Admiral Varek. His silver uniform carried enough medals to cover half his chest. His expression remained cold, practiced, and utterly confident. You command this fleet? Marcus nodded once. I do. You have entered Imperial territory without authorization. Correct. You are harboring Imperial prisoners. Marcus's voice remained steady. They're civilians. They belong to a government under Imperial jurisdiction. They asked for help. The Admiral leaned slightly forward. You misunderstand your position, human. Marcus waited. You are surrounded by superior military force. Withdraw immediately and surrender the vessel Valoran. This matter does not concern your species. The bridge aboard the Resolute remained completely silent. Every human officer watched Marcus. Every alien observer held their breath. Marcus answered with the same calm tone he had used since the beginning. It concerns us now. The Admiral's eyes hardened. I will ask only once more.
No.
You are willing to sacrifice your fleet for strangers? Marcus looked through the bridge canopy toward the battered alien ship floating behind the defensive line. They stopped being strangers the moment we answered their call. Captain Kalen stood beside the human commander. He had witnessed courage throughout his career. He had seen soldiers fight impossible battles to defend their own homes. He had watched officers sacrifice themselves for their own crews. He had never seen anyone prepare to die for an entire civilization they had met less than 2 days earlier. He stepped closer. You don't have to do this. Marcus didn't look away from the tactical display. I know. If they attack, I know. My people are not your responsibility. Marcus finally turned toward him. Captain, Kalen met his eyes. When I joined the Navy, they taught me that wearing this uniform meant one thing. What? If someone innocent stands behind me? Marcus glanced toward the growing wall of enemy ships. Then I don't move. Kalen felt his throat tighten. For the first time since leaving his homeworld decades earlier, he understood why the galaxy whispered about Deathworlders. They had mistaken strength for brutality. The truth was far more frightening. Humans simply refused to abandon people. Throughout the fleet, preparations continued. No speeches echoed through the corridors. No patriotic music played across communications. Instead, ordinary conversations unfolded. A young engineer quietly handed his wedding ring to a fellow mechanic. "If I don't make it, you'll give it back yourself." The engineer smiled. "I hope you're right." In another compartment, Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through rows of medical stations. Every bed was prepared. Every surgical team waited. She noticed one exhausted nurse tightening her gloves with trembling fingers. "When did you last sleep?" The nurse thought for a moment. "I don't remember." Elena gently squeezed her shoulder. "We finish this first." The nurse nodded. "We finish this first." Across the alien rescue ship, civilians watched through observation windows. Children who had spent weeks expecting death now watched another species prepare to face annihilation on their behalf. An elderly teacher whispered through tears, "They barely know us." One of the human volunteers standing nearby smiled softly. "Maybe. Then why?" The volunteer looked toward the defensive line. "My grandmother used to tell me something." "What?" "Character is what you do when helping costs you everything." The Imperial fleet completed its firing solution. Weapons reached maximum charge. The darkness between both armadas glowed with the terrifying light of energy gathering inside hundreds of spinal cannons. Grand Admiral Varric issued one final order. "Transmit to every human vessel." The communication reached the fleet instantly. "This is your final opportunity. Surrender." "No," the reply came before the translator finished speaking. One word, calm, absolute, no. Varric stared at the transmission. He had expected fear, negotiation, desperation. Instead, he found certainty. His tactical commander interrupted. "Admiral, what? Our predictive models have updated." Varric frowned. "Explain. If we engage, yes, the humans will lose. I know that." The officer swallowed. "But every simulation predicts catastrophic damage to our fleet." Another analyst spoke. "And something else." "What?" "They're broadcasting." Varric turned. "Broadcasting what?" The analyst enlarged the signal. Every human ship had opened external communications, not military frequencies, civilian ones. Across every channel in range, the same message repeated. "This is the human rescue fleet. We are protecting civilian refugees. We will not fire first. We ask all witnesses to record what happens next." Silence spread across the Imperial Bridge. Every nearby civilization was now listening. Every neutral observer, every trading guild, every independent colony. If the Empire opened fire first, the entire galaxy would watch. Minutes passed. Neither fleet moved. Weapons remained charged. The silence became unbearable. Then an unexpected transmission reached Grand Admiral Varric from Imperial High Command. He read it once, then again. His face changed. One simple order: stand down. Political advisors had already calculated the consequences. Destroying a fleet that had crossed half the galaxy carrying doctors instead of invasion forces would not create fear. It would create outrage. The Empire could defeat humans, but it could not survive becoming the civilization that murdered rescue workers before the eyes of the galaxy. Varric slowly lowered his head. "Order all vessels." His officers waited. "Withdraw." No one celebrated. The Imperial fleet simply turned. 27 dreadnoughts that had terrified entire civilizations altered course together before vanishing into slipspace without firing a single shot. For several long seconds, nobody aboard the Resolute believed what they had witnessed. Then the tactical officer whispered, "They're gone." Another confirmed. No hostile contacts remain. Only then did Marcus finally release the breath he had been holding. No cheers erupted. Instead, exhausted sailors quietly leaned against consoles. Some laughed. Others cried. One engineer simply sat on the floor, covering his face with both hands. They were alive. So were the people behind them. Weeks later, the combined convoy reached Kalen's homeworld. Billions watched from cities, mountains, deserts, and oceans as the damaged Valoran, still wrapped within human engineering supports, entered orbit. No military parade awaited, only families. Children searched the sky for parents they believed had died. Parents searched for sons and daughters lost beyond known space. When the first landing craft touched the surface, the crowd remained completely silent. The ramp lowered. Captain Kalen stepped out first. Behind him came survivors, then human medics, then engineers still wearing oil-stained uniforms. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then millions of voices broke at once. Families rushed forward. Children collided with parents. Brothers embraced sisters. Friends fell to their knees weeping. Human volunteers quietly stepped aside, allowing reunion after reunion to unfold around them. Doctor. Elena watched one elderly mother hold her daughter as though afraid she might disappear again. A single tear rolled down Elena's cheek. A mechanic beside her smiled. "Worth the trip." She nodded. "Every kilometer." Days later, the Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session unlike any in history. Representatives expect military accusations. Instead, Captain Kalen stood before every government in known space. Behind him played recordings captured during the rescue. Human doctors refusing to leave operating rooms. Engineers welding through exhaustion. Sailors carrying alien children through smoke-filled corridors. Warships placing themselves between helpless civilians and overwhelming military power. Finally, the recording ended with Marcus Hale's quiet words. "They'll have to go through us first." No applause followed, only silence. Because every civilization understood the same truth. For generations, they had feared Earth because it was a death world. They believed humanity's greatest weapon was its resilience. They were wrong. It was compassion, a species capable of crossing half the galaxy, risking extinction itself, simply because someone they had never met whispered one desperate request: "Help us." Years later, every emergency beacon manufactured anywhere in known space carried one additional translation encoded into its automatic response system. No matter the language, no matter the species, no matter the stars between them, the message never changed. "Hold on, we are coming."